Hey guys, welcome back to another video, and today would be looking into another algorithm of OS, which is shortest job first. Hope you're staying home, staying safe, and let's just get on to the video. So shortest job first is a scheduling algorithm, and in this algorithm we would be looking into two of its types. One is preemptive, another one is non-preemptive. So what does these types actually mean? So preemptive is basically, let's say you're like a process is working on, so let's say P1 is working, and suddenly we have another process with a smaller burst time, let's say P2 comes into like the RAM, and there would be a context switch. So there would be a comparison first. So if P1 is smaller than P2, then P1 would do its work. However, if there's a case where P2 is smaller than P1, then there would be a context switch, because P2 has a smaller burst time, so the CPU would prefer P2 first. And non-preemptive is like completely different from preemptive, so it's like the opposite. So if P1 is working and we have like another process, let's say P2, that comes into the RAM, even if P2 has like a smaller burst time, P2 would not get the CPU, rather P1 would keep on working until it's done. Then we would look into if there are like smaller processes with smaller burst time, then we would pick that one. So preemptive is switching when there is a new process with shorter burst time. Non-preemptive doesn't switch when in cases where there are smaller burst time processes coming in. One of the things that you have to remember here is that we never look into the remaining time, as the name suggests. So it's the shortest job first rather than shortest remaining job first. So we always have to look into the burst time. So this is like the problem that is given to us, and in this problem we would be basically finding out the waiting time and turnaround time for each process. So let's just look into how this works out. So initially we have P1, right? So P1 has an arrival time of 0. So at the 0th second, P1 gets the CPU, and P1 works for 2 seconds, right? Because at the 2nd second we have like another process that's coming into the RAM. So at the 2 second, P1 has already worked for 2 seconds, so it would have a remaining of 5 seconds. Then at like the 2nd second, we see there's another process called P2, and P2 has a burst time of 4 seconds, which is much smaller. So P2 is much smaller than P1, right, if we compare their burst times. So as this is a preemptive type algorithm, so we would be switching, there would be a context switch. So P2 would get the CPU, and P2 would work for 2 seconds. So at 4 seconds, P2 has a remaining of 2 seconds, and at the 4th second we see another process coming into the RAM, so that is P3. Now we have to compare all of these. So we have to compare P1, P2 and P3, and among all of these, which one has like the smallest burst time? So P3 definitely has the smallest burst time, right, because it has like 1 second. So P3 takes the CPU, P3 works for 1 second, so P3 wouldn't have anything left to work with. So at the 5th second we are done. At the 5th second we see another process, P4. So P3 is completely done, right? So at the 5th second we see P4 with a burst time of 4 seconds. Now P3 is gone, right? So we have P1, P2 and P4 now. P2 and P4, they both have the same burst time, right? Now what are we going to do here? So P2 already had the CPU, so P2 would get the priority here. So P2 gets the CPU, P2 had 2 seconds of work left, so P2 works for 2 seconds, P2 is now 0 second, and at the 7th second we have only P1 and P4, right? And among P1 and P4, P4 has the smallest burst time, so 4 here. So P4 gets the CPU, P4 works for 4 seconds, which is 11 seconds here. P4 doesn't have anything left. Then we only have one process left, which is P1. So P1 takes the CPU and it had a remaining of 5 seconds, so it works for 5 seconds, and at the 16th second P1 is done. So we are done with all the processes here. Now let's just calculate the waiting time and turnaround time. So always remember that these are the formulas for waiting time and turnaround time. So P1 comes at the 0th second, right? Comes at the 0th second, and it leaves the RAM at the 16th second. So it was inside the RAM for 16 minus 0, that's 16 seconds. So let's just write it down. So it was in the RAM for 16 seconds, and waiting time is always turnaround time minus the burst time. So for this case, we have 16 seconds for the turnaround, and the burst time is 7 seconds. So this would give us 9 seconds of waiting time. Now for P2, so P2 came into the RAM at the 2nd second and got the CPU instantly, and P2 left at the 7th second. So its turnaround time is 7 minus 2, it's 5 seconds, and its burst time is 4, so 5 minus 4 would have 1. So P2 actually waited for 1 second. Now we have P3. P3 came at the 4th second, got the CPU instantly, and worked for 1 second and left at the 5th second, right? So the turnaround time for P3 is 1 second because it worked for only 1 second. There was no waiting time here. That's why is 0 seconds for the waiting time. In terms of P4, so P4 came into the RAM at the 5th second. However, it got it at the 7th second and ended its work at 11 seconds. So 11 minus 5 seconds, that's 6 seconds for its turnaround time, and the burst time was 4, so it waited for 2 seconds. And this is the whole preemptive process of shortest job first. So this is what you have to answer, and this would be the answer. And let's just look into the non-preemptive version of it, which is much easier than this. So now we'd be looking into the non-preemptive version of shortest job first, and we have like the same problem here. And so let's just get into it. So remember, non-preemptive is when we do not switch even when there is a new process with a smaller burst time. So similarly, P1 at the 0th second, it gets the CPU instantly. It works for 2 seconds. At the 2nd second, we have another process called P2. So P1 worked for 2 seconds, which means that it has left 5 seconds. So P2 comes into at the 2nd second. However, P1 wouldn't switch because this is a non-preemptive version of it. So P1 would continue going on. So at the 4th second, we have another process. So P1 has worked for 4 seconds, which means P1 has left 3 seconds. So at the 4th second, we have P3, and P3 has a smaller burst time, but as this is a non-preemptive version of it, so we wouldn't be switching, and P1 continues. So P1 continues. At the 5th second, we see that there's another process, so P1 has only 2 seconds left. And at the 5th second, we have another process which also has a smaller burst time than P1, but we wouldn't be switching again. So P1 continues, and at the 7th second, P1 has completed everything, all of its works. And all the other processes like P2, P3 and P4, they already have came into the RAM. And now we are going to just compare between all of these, right? So P3 has a smaller burst time, so P3 takes the CPU, works for 1 second and wouldn't have anything left, so 8 seconds. Now we have P2 and P4. So the rule of thumb here is that P2 came into the RAM earlier than P4, right? It came into the RAM at 2 seconds, whereas P4 came at the 5th second. So P2 would definitely take the CPU. So P2 takes the CPU, works for 4 seconds, which would be 12 seconds here. P2 wouldn't have anything left. Then so we are done with P3 and P2, so we are left with P4. So P4, being the last process, it has 4 seconds of burst time. So at the 16th second it completes its work and P4 has nothing left. So let's just write their turnaround time and burst time. So P1 came at 0 second, P1 left at the 7th second. So the turnaround time is 7 seconds. It didn't wait for anything, so 0 seconds. P2 on the other hand, it came at the 2nd second, however P2 left at the 12th second, so 12 minus 2, so its turnaround time is basically 10 seconds, and the waiting time, as I said before, so turnaround time minus the burst time, which is 6 seconds. P3 came into the RAM at the 4th second and left at the 8th second, so it waited for 4 seconds, and it has a burst time of 1, so it waited for 3 seconds. P4 came at the 5th second, ended at the 16th second, so it waited for, so its turnaround time is 11 seconds and the burst time is basically 7 seconds, so 11 minus 4. So this is the non-preemptive version of shortest job first. And always remember, you never look into the remaining time, always the burst time, and always compare them. And that's about it for shortest job first. Hope you guys did like the video, and if you have any comments or suggestions, feel free to comment down below. Thank you.